What if the most valuable Ferrari power unit data of the 2026 era wasn't leaked to the media, but quietly surfaced because keeping it hidden was becoming impossible? Because when fragments of internal Maranello data began circulating, the reaction across the paddock wasn't excitement, it was disbelief. Not at how fast it looked, but at how stable it appeared compared to everything else teams are seeing right now. Behind closed doors, engineers are already questioning assumptions they thought were settled months ago. Assumptions about thermal limits, energy behavior, and how much compromise the new rules would inevitably force. This data suggests Ferrari may have found a way around that expectation entirely. And here's why this story demands attention all the way through. If what's hidden inside these numbers is as significant as insiders quietly suggest, then Ferrari hasn't just uncovered an advantage, it may have redefined the baseline for the entire 2026 era. And once you realize how early that understanding could have been locked in, it becomes very hard not to keep watching how this unfolds. Once this hidden Ferrari power unit data began circulating beyond Maranello's inner technical circle, the first response from rival teams was not panic, but recalibration. The numbers didn't present a dramatic leap in peak output or headline efficiency. Instead, they showed something far more uncomfortable: predictability. Across simulations that normally expose weaknesses, varying fuel loads, long deployment cycles, fluctuating thermal states, Ferrari's data remained remarkably composed. That composure is what set alarm bells ringing. Because in the 2026 regulations, volatility is expected. Stability at this stage is not. What immediately distinguishes this data is how few corrective mechanisms appear to be active. Most early power unit concepts rely heavily on safeguards, conservative deployment maps, aggressive cooling buffers, software limits designed to protect fragile components. Ferrari's internal figures suggest far less reliance on those protections. Not because they are absent, but because they are rarely needed. That implies a system that is fundamentally comfortable operating close to its intended window, something teams usually spend years trying to achieve. Inside rival power unit programs, this has triggered a deeply uncomfortable realization. If Ferrari's concept genuinely behaves this cleanly now, then its engineers are no longer guessing. They are refining. And refinement happens much faster than discovery under the cost cap. Teams still searching for correlation are burning resources just to stand still, while Ferrari appears free to layer understanding on top of an already coherent foundation. That divergence is subtle at first and devastating over time. There's also growing attention on what this data implies about Ferrari's early design decisions. Stability like this doesn't emerge accidentally. It requires restraint at moments when aggressive optimization is tempting. It requires confidence in long-term behavior rather than short-term validation. The SF-26 figures suggest Ferrari may have accepted slower early gains to avoid locking itself into brittle solutions. If that's true, then Maranello's biggest secret isn't a breakthrough, it's discipline. From a car integration standpoint, the implications are significant. A predictable power unit simplifies everything around it. Cooling layouts can be tighter. Weight distribution becomes more flexible. Aerodynamic concepts can be pushed closer to their limits without constant fear of thermal or electrical instability. Those freedoms don't belong to the engine department alone, they ripple across the entire project. And once those ripples settle, the competitive gap becomes very difficult to identify, let alone close. Drivers, too, stand to benefit in ways that don't immediately show up in lap times. A power unit that delivers energy consistently reduces cognitive load. Throttle application becomes intuitive rather than cautious. Race management shifts from survival to control. That kind of trust between driver and machinery is rare early in a regulation cycle, and when it exists, it changes how pressure is applied over a race distance. Not explosively, relentlessly. And this is why the hidden Ferrari power unit data hasn't been dismissed as speculation. Because it doesn't promise domination. It suggests inevitability. A project that understands its own limits early is free to expand them gradually, while others are still discovering where those limits even lie. If this data truly reflects Ferrari's baseline rather than its ceiling, then what's emerging from Maranello isn't just a competitive 2026 engine. It's a warning that Ferrari may have already solved the hardest part of a new era, and that everything else from here on is simply execution. As teams continue to quietly analyze what this hidden Ferrari data might represent, the tone inside technical meetings is shifting from curiosity to unease. Not because the numbers look unbeatable, but because they look finished. Most early-stage power units reveal their weaknesses clearly: spikes in temperature, unstable energy recovery, sensitivity to minor setup changes. Ferrari's figures, by contrast, suggest a system that already knows how it wants to operate. That kind of self-consistency normally appears much later in a regulation cycle, after countless iterations. Seeing it now forces rivals to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Ferrari may already be past the most painful phase of development. What's especially troubling is how this affects Ferrari's future upgrade path. When a power unit is unstable, upgrades are risky. Every change can create new problems, forcing teams to move cautiously and reactively. But when the baseline is calm, upgrades become additive rather than corrective. They stack cleanly. They correlate more reliably. That means Ferrari can afford to develop methodically, while others are still spending resources just to keep their concepts under control. Over time, that difference in efficiency becomes more decisive than any single performance gain. Inside rival factories, engineers are beginning to reassess assumptions they made early in the 2026 process. Many accepted that volatility was unavoidable under the new hybrid rules. They designed around it. Ferrari's data challenges that assumption directly. If instability isn't inevitable, then some teams may have built limitations into their own projects unnecessarily. That realization is deeply uncomfortable because those decisions are now embedded in hardware that can't easily be redesigned without enormous cost. There is also growing attention on how this power unit behavior influences Ferrari's race-to-race adaptability. A predictable system responds better to external changes, different tracks, climates, and operating demands. It allows engineers to fine-tune rather than reinvent. That adaptability doesn't generate headlines, but it determines who looks prepared when conditions deviate from expectations. Rivals are starting to worry that Ferrari's COM data profile isn't about dominating ideal scenarios, it's about surviving imperfect ones better than anyone else. From a strategic perspective, this places Ferrari in a position of quiet control. They don't need to force development timelines. They don't need to gamble on extreme updates. They can afford to observe how others struggle, learn from those struggles, and refine their own package accordingly. That patience is powerful because it shifts pressure outward. Other teams feel compelled to accelerate, to take risks, to chase solutions Ferrari may not even need. That dynamic has defined dominant eras long before results made it obvious. Regulators, meanwhile, are watching carefully but uneasily. Nothing in Ferrari's data suggests exploitation or rule bending. If anything, it looks conservative. But conservative solutions that produce long-term advantages pose a unique challenge for the FIA. They can't intervene without undermining innovation itself. Yet they also can't ignore patterns that suggest one team has found a structurally superior way to interpret the rules. That tension will only intensify once on-track evidence begins to align with what these hidden numbers hint at. And this is why the story surrounding Maranello's hidden power unit data remains unresolved. Because the figures don't tell us how fast Ferrari will be in 2026. They tell us how comfortable Ferrari may already be with a set of rules everyone else is still trying to tame. If that comfort translates into consistent execution, then these early leaks won't be remembered as technical curiosities. They'll be remembered as the moment the paddock realized Ferrari wasn't chasing the new era anymore. It was quietly positioning itself to let the rest of the grid exhaust itself, trying to catch up. As this hidden Ferrari power unit data continues to be discussed in ever tighter circles, a more strategic concern is beginning to surface among rival teams. This isn't just about what Ferrari has built, it's about when Ferrari seems to have finished understanding it. Most teams are still trapped in an exploratory phase, where every solution creates two new questions. Ferrari's data suggests that phase may already be behind them. When understanding comes early, development stops being speculative and starts becoming intentional. That shift alone can define an entire regulation cycle because it changes how resources are spent and how aggressively decisions are made. What's particularly unsettling is how this early clarity reshapes Ferrari's internal priorities. Teams still dealing with instability are forced to prioritize damage control. Ferrari, by contrast, appears free to think ahead. Long-term reliability curves, seasonal development pacing, even how aggressively to push future updates without destabilizing the platform. That kind of forward planning is only possible when the underlying system behaves exactly as expected. And rivals are beginning to fear that Ferrari is no longer reacting to the 2026 rules, it's planning around them. Inside rival technical departments, the discussion has shifted toward an uncomfortable admission. Even if Ferrari isn't faster on day one, it may be better prepared on every day after that. A stable power unit accelerates learning, and learning accelerates improvement. Under the cost cap, that feedback loop becomes brutally effective. Teams still fixing basic issues simply don't have the bandwidth to extract marginal gains at the same rate. That imbalance doesn't show up immediately. It shows up gradually as development curves diverge in ways that are impossible to correct mid-cycle. There is also a growing belief that Ferrari's data reflects a deeper confidence in how the regulations will be policed. A team doesn't commit to restraint unless it believes the goalposts are unlikely to move dramatically. If Ferrari feels secure enough to build conservatively, it suggests they trust their interpretation of the rules and their understanding of how those rules will be enforced. That confidence matters, because nothing destabilizes a project faster than regulatory uncertainty. And nothing accelerates one faster than believing the ground beneath it won't shift unexpectedly. From an operational perspective, this kind of stability changes how race weekends unfold. A predictable power unit allows Ferrari to prepare setups with greater precision. Engine modes become tools rather than safeguards. Strategy becomes proactive rather than defensive. That doesn't create dramatic Saturday headlines. It creates quiet Sundays where pressure is applied consistently and mistakes are forced from others. Those are the weekends that decide championships long before the standings make it obvious. The political implications are just as subtle. A team that appears calm and coherent gains credibility without asking for it. When Ferrari participates in technical discussions, its data-backed composure shapes the tone of debate. Not through confrontation, but through example. Over time, that influence can affect how clarifications are framed and how future gray areas are approached. It's not power in the traditional sense, it's gravitational pull. And once a team becomes a reference point, it's very difficult for others to dislodge that position. And this is why the hidden Ferrari power unit data still feels like the beginning of the story, not the conclusion. Because the numbers themselves don't tell us how dominant Ferrari will be. They tell us how ready Ferrari is to exploit whatever opportunities the new era presents. If that readiness translates into controlled execution on track, then these early figures won't be remembered as a leak. They'll be remembered as the moment the rest of the grid realized Ferrari wasn't scrambling to understand 2026 anymore. It had already built the conditions to shape how that era would unfold. As this hidden Ferrari power unit data continues to reshape internal conversations, a more subtle concern is starting to dominate rival thinking. Ferrari doesn't appear to be racing against the clock anymore. Most teams are still in a constant sprint, trying to stabilize concepts before deadlines close in. Ferrari's figures suggest a project that has slowed down deliberately, not because it lacks urgency, but because it has already passed the phase where urgency is dangerous. That shift from urgency to control is profound. It allows decisions to be made for the right reasons, not simply the fastest ones. And in Formula One, the teams that stop panicking first usually gain an advantage that's invisible until it's too late. What's especially unsettling is how this affects Ferrari's internal confidence hierarchy. When data behaves predictably, engineers trust it. When engineers trust data, management trusts engineers. That alignment reduces friction at every level of the organization. Decisions become cleaner. Development paths stop fragmenting, and resources stop being wasted on parallel solutions designed to hedge uncertainty. Rival teams recognize this pattern immediately because they know how rare it is and how difficult it is to replicate once your project has already branched in multiple directions. Inside other power unit programs, there's now a growing fear that Ferrari has quietly eliminated one of the biggest drains on performance: internal doubt. Doubt forces compromise. It forces over-engineering. It forces teams to carry margins they don't want but feel they need. Ferrari's data suggests those margins may already be thinner, not because Ferrari is reckless, but because it understands its limits more clearly. That clarity frees up performance everywhere else, even if no single metric looks revolutionary on its own. There's also increasing focus on what this means for Ferrari's error tolerance over an entire season. A stable power unit doesn't just perform better, it forgives mistakes more easily. Small setup errors don't cascade into failures. Aggressive strategies don't collapse unexpectedly. That forgiveness changes how teams race. It allows Ferrari to push competitors into uncomfortable positions, knowing its own system is less likely to punish risk. Over time, that dynamic forces rivals into either conservatism or desperation, neither of which is a winning place to be. From a development standpoint, this stability gives Ferrari a quiet but decisive edge. When the baseline is calm, correlation improves. Wind tunnel data matches track data. Simulation becomes predictive rather than speculative. That alignment accelerates learning at a rate rivals struggling with volatility simply can't match. Under the cost cap, learning speed is often more decisive than outright innovation. And Ferrari's hidden data suggests it may already be learning faster than anyone else without appearing to do anything dramatic at all. The FIA, observing these patterns, faces an uncomfortable reality. Ferrari's approach looks entirely legitimate. In fact, it looks like exactly what the rules were designed to encourage. Yet if this philosophy leads to a sustained structural advantage, it raises questions about whether convergence can truly be engineered through regulation alone. The regulator can't punish discipline. It can't penalize understanding. All it can do is watch as the consequences of early clarity begin to unfold. And this is why the story of Maranello's hidden power unit data still feels unresolved. Because nothing about it screams dominance. It whispers preparation. It suggests a team that has already accepted the rules, internalized their implications, and built something designed to live comfortably within them. If that comfort translates into consistent execution once racing begins, then these early figures won't be remembered as leaked data. They'll be remembered as the moment Ferrari quietly stepped out of the development chaos and left the rest of the grid fighting problems it had already learned how to avoid.